From the land of Grant University in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, this is the Closing Market Report. It is the 4th day of March 2025. I'm Todd Gleason, out of the office. Today, corn, ethanol, conservation, and a conversation. We'll talk with John Doggett. He is the former CEO at the National Corn Growers Association and serves now as the principal at Camas Creek Consulting. I asked John to tell us just a little bit about himself and his background.
I am the principal and entire staff of Camas Creek Consulting, LLC, and I'm mostly retired after being the CEO of the National Corn Growers and working with 3 different ag trade associations in Washington, D.C. over 30-some years. People ask me, about going to D.C. In 1988, in January of 1988, I went to Washington, D.C. from Montana to work for the Montana Congressman Ron Marlene, and my wife and I told my parents and her parents that we were taking their 2 lovely grandchildren from them for 2 years, 5 at the most, and then we were coming back home to Montana. That was 1988. I retired 2 years ago. Math is hard.
Well, if you've tried to do 45Z, it is hard. So.
It enabled me to do some of that, yeah.
Right. Okay, so a couple of things. You've already given me a little bit about your background, so that's fine. Can you spell the name of your consulting group?
Okay, it's Camas, Camas. Crick, and I'm from Montana. We pronounce the name of streams correctly. Creek is Crick in Montana. And that comes from Camas Creek Cattle and Sheep Ranch in central Montana. That's where I grew up, on that ranch. And my family was there for 5 generations. And so that's where I grew up, 100 miles from the nearest stoplight. And went to the University of Montana, and then got out, sold real estate for a while, and then got in the farm equipment industry in the early and mid 80s, which was just a grand time to be in the farm equipment industry.
And particularly out west, yes.
Yeah, and so I went from a district for Alice Chalmers that sold 125 combines a year to selling 6. Because we had the pick program and a drought in the same year. And so I was a stockbroker for a short time. And then a friend of mine called me and said that the congressman was looking for somebody to do his ag stuff. And so went to Washington, D.C., worked for the congressman for 3 years. He was a senior Republican on the House Ag Committee. He was the ranking Republican on the Wheat, Feed Grains, and Oilseeds subcommittee. And the chairman of that subcommittee was a guy by the name of Dan Glickman. And so then I worked for the National Cattlemen's Association for about a year. I was at the Farm Bureau for 11 years, just over 16 years running the D.C. office for the National Corn Growers, and then a little over 4 years as the CEO.
On that note, we do want to talk about conservation today, and in the grand scheme, a lot of this is related to what happened in the 30s. Again, the droughts that we have experienced in the last 4 decades, and I'm wondering why you think it is important to adopt conservation and climate smart practices.
Well, first of all, you're correct. Agriculture has been in partnership with the federal government since the 1930s on conservation efforts. It has been a very good investment for the taxpayer. It has made our agriculture industry in this country the great thing that it is. But as I said, I worked for the American Farm Bureau back in the 90s. And I was the guy that dealt with climate change and the Kyoto Protocol and cap and trade and all of those things. And I think people might remember where the Farm Bureau was then, inalterably opposed. We don't believe there is climate change, and we fought it tooth and tongue. And we were wrong. But there were a lot of people wrong back in the 90s about about this subject. And, I tell my friends in the environmental community, they never made it easy for us to be with them, and we never made it easy for them to be with us. And we did not find ways to work through that. And so as time's gone on, and looking at how the climate has changed in this country, my wife and I have owned a house down here in Tallahassee for the last 9 years, seeing what goes on down here, what goes on in Montana, what goes on around the world. It's very apparent that the climate is changing. And back in the 90s, farmers thought climate was changing at a percentage much less than the general population. Now farmers and ranchers believe that there's climate change at a percentage much greater than the general population. We missed some opportunities since the early and late 90s. We've missed a lot of opportunities. We've had 20 years of talking at one another, yelling at one another. And so we're gradually getting to a point where there's some opportunities in this space for farmers, for the environment, for those small communities that are so dependent on having farmers that make a little money on the outside of town. Those are important things. And so this is an opportunity for me to work with a lot of different folks to say, we didn't approach this the right way years ago, and now we're going to try something new. I've worked for 3 different ag trade associations. I've worked with farmers and ranchers all my life. They want voluntary incentive-based programs that allow them to take a little bit of a risk, to try something different, to embrace some new technologies. And you know what? Everybody wins when we do that. And we finally have some money through the Inflation Reduction Act, passed a couple years ago by the Congress. And we're going to have some money now to transform U.S. agriculture. This isn't money to deal with low prices and high input costs. And we need to deal with that. That's really, really important. We need to have a strong Title I in the next farm bill because people are hurting. But this other money, that's long-term money. That's a long-term investment. It's 5 years with $3 billion. Think of the things that we can do with that money, that partnership between the landowner and the operator and the American taxpayer who wants to work with us. And I think we have some great opportunities, not only to have some new agronomic practices, but to open up new markets, new opportunities, to put some more stability in that farming operation and put some more stability into the local community that supports that farm. We have some wonderful opportunities, but it's sure taken us a long time to get there.
There is a hill to climb, a capital hill to climb here, where that IRA money looks like it might need or want to be used in the way you just told us, that probably you would prefer it not be used. You I'm guessing, want to continue to use it as the investment side for the long term, rather than to offset short-term issues within the farm economy as prices have come down and farmers are trying to catch up on the input side and being buried by some of those capital investments. Can you keep Capitol Hill on track to separate those funds?
Being in Washington for 35 years, I found over time I made prognostications at great peril. And certainly in the current political situation, I can't forecast that. I don't know. I would hope that we could. And I think had this program started 2 years earlier than it did, because we're just seeing the first tranche of money come in the last year or so. Had we had 2 years more experience in that program by now, I think we would have more to show folks to say, here's what that money is doing. Here's the investments that are being made. Here's the return. Here is what is happening. it isn't all about the environment. I know that in certain quarters, climate change is still a bad phrase, but this is part of it. But the other part of it is improving soil health, improving agronomic practices, getting yields up with fewer inputs, and having some profit, having some new markets. And those are, if you cast this as, they're throwing money at farmers again, we need to take that and redirect that to Title One or something else, or put that down for savings, I think we're going to miss an opportunity. Right now, we have all of this money in incentive-based voluntary programs. If we throw that money away, we could have another administration come along that wants to do the same thing, but they're not going to do it with incentives. They're going to do it with regulations. Let's let the American taxpayer catch agriculture doing great things for not only agriculture, but for the country and for the world. And we have an opportunity here if we use this money wisely and and start that transformation. Agriculture is transforming all the time. It's amazing the innovation that it goes on farms and ranches around this country. We can accelerate that and greatly benefit from it.
Can you reach back through your history and tell me what it may be that you learned during the transition period prior to the build out of ethanol, trying to build the coalitions that created the RFS across environmental and farm groups, which, as you have already told us, oftentimes made it very difficult for themselves to work with each other. What did you learn there that can be applied today for the collaborative efforts of farm groups and environmental groups and others that would be interested in these conservation practices?
I remember one of my early mentors saying, when you go to Capitol Hill, you're not there to solve your problem. Nobody cares about your problem. Help somebody else solve their problem, and if it helps you, all the better. We have to build coalitions, and we've been good at building coalitions from time to time. Some of those coalitions have lasted and gone through some tough times and come out okay. The relationships that we have built with the environmental community, the conservation community, and I'm not talking about the wild, crazy environmental community. I'm talking about the more mainstream folks that do understand that if you want conservation on farm ground, you got to work with the farmer. And there have been some really good coalitions, partnerships through the years, and they get better some years and not so good the next year. We've also built some really good coalitions with the hunger community. And remembering some of those early days with GMO technology, and because we had a relationship with some of the hunger groups, they called me and said, can you come talk to our folks about GMO technology? I had 70 people in a room talking about GMO technology and had nearly unanimous acceptance after I got done explaining things for 15 minutes. When we had fuel versus food back in 2012, again, the hunger community said, what's going on? And we went and explained to them what was going on and how ethanol was not taking food from people. That's a relationship that benefited agriculture tremendously because those folks were on our side. We worked with the petroleum industry in the first energy bill back in the early 2000s, and along with the coal industry and the nuclear folks and everybody else in the energy space. The next energy bill we worked with the environmental community and made even more gains. So, those relationships are important. You have to have the relationship before you can have the partnership. And when you walk into a room with a partner, that is really, really powerful. Locks and dams. I tell you what, I got to give a lot of credit to the Illinois corn growers. They have done a great job working on locks and dams with the carpenters union. I remember going in with some carpenters and some farmers into congressional offices, and they wondered what was going on. Those are good things that happen. So we have to have those those relationships, those partnerships, and you have to help the other person solve their problem as well. We need to remember that the top 10 corn growing states in this country, and that includes Illinois, which has a large congressional delegation, those top 10 states have 94 House members in the House of Representatives, a House that has 435 members. I'm not good at math, but 218 is 50% plus one in the House of Representatives. If you only have 94 votes, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to get more to go ahead and help out the corn industry. So you have to have partnerships, and you have to have it with the SNAP recipients, and you have to have it with the environmental community, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, and even working with the grain industry.
So how do you build those partnerships for conservation? And who should farmers look to? Which organizations do they need to be thinking about? And what is it that those organizations need or want? And do you have to ask them? How do you figure all of that out?
Well, I think it's do you have a relationship with your local rod and gun club? That's where a lot of this conservation starts. It doesn't start with some lobbyist in an environmental organization inside the Capitol Beltway. It oftentimes starts with, the principal at the local grade school who likes to hunt and fish, and who, they have a rod and gun club, and then you got folks up and down Main Street that belong to that, and they're interested in hunting and fishing, and that means they're interested in conservation and work with local landowners. That's where a lot of this stuff starts. I think we make it too complicated by making the local relationships always in the end that's the best place to start that conversation and that movement, because that's where the real political power in this country still lies.
Now, related to the RA funding, what when farmers are out and they're actually talking to their peers in their community, should they be discussing with them as it's related to conservation funding, climate smart agriculture, the things that might be worthwhile to have on the farm or to be regulated into, one of the two?
Well, we want incentive-based voluntary programs, and let's make them work. And some of these programs are really working well. We haven't had enough time to really be able to point to the things I think we'll be able to point to in another 12, 18 months, but we're making some progress. Somebody asked me a couple months ago, how do farmers learn about new methods and new technologies? And I said, it's over the fence. You're driving down the road, and what are the Joneses doing there? They're doing something different. Man, that stand of corn looks really good, but they're doing something different. What are they doing? Maybe I want to try that as well. I think sometimes those are the best ways that technology gets exposed to other farmers.
How can farmers ensure their voices are heard when shaping policy in D.C., especially for this upcoming farm bill? It is on a very tight timeline now again.
What I told farmers over the years was almost all of us have raised kids. All of us have had this discussion with kids. You need to figure out what it is that you need versus what it is that you want. And I've seen farm groups in Washington going with a long list of things that they wanted. They didn't prioritize. They didn't designate what it was that they absolutely needed. And so they got left by the wayside. Work within your ag organizations, help develop that policy. But again, what is it that you need versus what you want? What is politically doable? And that's where I think we really need, and I'm not at all biased, that's where you've got to count on your Washington folks, your lobbyists in Washington, D.C., many of whom come from farms and ranches, about what's politically possible. Again, we don't have the numbers. So if we're going in to talk about a policy that agriculture needs, we also need to be very vocal, very clear, and very articulate about what that policy will do for others, not just farmers, but rural communities and the greater good of this country. And when we do that, then we get noticed and solve somebody else's problems, and bring votes to the party. If you can bring a vote, you're probably likely to have a seat at the table.
In this case, why is it that American agriculture needs the conservation policies?
Well, we are going to have conservation on farms and ranches no matter what the federal government does, because farmers and ranchers will do the right thing. But we can get them to do more of that if there's some financial assistance, if there is some risk mitigation in that, and if we can go ahead and improve soil health, or we can open another market. Conservation programs, particularly the ones outlined in the Inflation Reduction Act, they are there to create opportunities. This isn't government writing a check. These are farmers and ranchers and landowners saying, I'm going to try this, we're going to work this out, we're going to have a partnership, and everybody's going to benefit from this. This is an everybody benefits kind of a thing. And we have this great potential to, one more time, spotlight the great things that agriculture is doing with a fairly small investment on the part of the taxpayer.
In the IRA, how much funding is there for conservation?
We're looking at $3 billion over 5 years. Seems like a lot of money, but it seems like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but it is money. We have a short window here to access that program. We better do it. And we have a lot of people who are starting into those programs. Hopefully they will continue to be funded. But we need this. This is money that is a long-term investment. And certainly we need more money in Title I. We need more money in other aspects of the Farm Bill. But let's not rob Peter to pay Paul, because sooner or later, Peter is going to go ahead and get his way. And again, let's not miss a golden opportunity for a well-funded, incentive-based, voluntary program that could keep us from having to deal with a regulatory overload in years to come.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
John Doggett is the principal at Camas Crick Consulting and past CEO at the National Corn Growers Association. You've been listening to the Closing Market Report from Illinois Public Media, online at willag.org, willag.org. I'm Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason.